Hey, look, it's my face. I'm still talking a little funny and my teeth are still a little weird, but I feel like I can show myself in public again. There's still going to be a couple of those Transformers Prime reviews that I recorded audio only, so you're still going to get some stuff with the Avatar in the near future, but it's going to be fine. It's going to be fun. We're going to get to revisit some places we haven't been to recently, but you'll see what I mean when that happens. Today, though, I'm recording something new. I just recently finished playing through everything I can conceive that's worth playing through in the new Pokemon DLC, the Teal Mask. And I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to keep this brief because I probably went into a little too much detail in my Scarlet and Violet review. And I think the main takeaway from the Teal Mask DLC for Pokemon is, if you didn't like Scarlet or Violet, you're not going to like this. It's the same game, but I think done a little bit better, just in kind of a microcosm. But if you're hung up on the graphics, which, like, if you are, that's fine. Your opinion is valid. If you're hung up on the graphics, or you don't like the gameplay, you don't like the terrestrial thing or whatever, this is still the same game, right? It's still an open world that's gated off by the abilities that your ride Pokemon has. So the layout of it, well, I think they do a better job of populating the locations here with interesting stuff, is really the same. The design fundamentals of the locations are generally the same. And this is my one personal major criticism of this. Just like with the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra for Sword and Shield, these DLCs are designed such that, this one and the next one are both going to be designed such that you're supposed to be able to come here early on in your playthrough and then play through this segmentally as you unlock new abilities for Koraidon in the main game. Or at least this one is. The second one might not be. Because the second one, the Indigo Disc, might actually be gated off behind, like, the entirety of that one's story might be gated off behind the story of this one. And if that's the case, that'll be true endgame content. Like an actual post-game. Which I'm very excited for, because there are already some NPC trainers in Teal Mask who have Pokemon in the 70s with competitive stat spreads and movesets. They're really hard. Unless you come at them with a team full of level 100s, they're really hard. Like my hero character beat him pretty easily, but he's hero. I talk him up a lot. I talk up a lot how powerful he is in the universe of the games. But that's just because he is. Like, I'm not exaggerating. But my other OC, AJ, who was the one who actually played out the story of this DLC in the Let's Play, which you guys should check out, she had a lot of trouble with him. It was rough going. A couple of them beat her pretty soundly the first times they fought. And if the Indigo Disc is designed to have trainers who are even tougher than them, that's going to be awesome. And even if they're not, even if they're just scaled above where the rival characters were at the end of this DLC, that's still going to be pretty impressive, level-wise, especially if they give the, what do they call them, the Blueberry League or whatever, the Elite Four of Blueberry Academy. If they give them competitive stat spreads and movesets, kind of like they did with, like, the best example is Cynthia in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, right? They took her team from the original Diamond and Pearl and gave it an overhaul where the abilities and items and stat spreads were more competitive. If they do something like that, except they build these characters' teams from the ground up to be competitive, this could be the toughest Elite Four ever. It's also very possible, because we know who the Elite Four is now from the promotional stuff we've gotten so far. We can work backwards to figure out who the Blueberry Elite Four is. It's very possible that one of the rival characters from Teal Mask, Kieran, is going to be the champion of that Elite Four when we get there. Because he's being set up as an antagonist. Like a major antagonist. Which would make him the first champion who was a rival in a very long time. and I'm excited about that. I'm excited for the possibility. And that's just stuff that the Teal Mask sets up for the future. The Teal Mask also does a lot of stuff really well, I think, on its own. There's a side quest with these two rich characters who I despise as people, but as characters, they're really fun. And it leads you all around the map, and it's one of those things that if you were playing this parallel to a playthrough of the main game, you would just come across them naturally as you were exploring the map. And even though the first time I fought them in my game, having beaten the League and the post-game as it exists so far, even though keeping all that in mind, the one of the two of them that you fight had a Pokemon in the 60s, I wouldn't be surprised if her Pokemon are significantly lower leveled the first time you fight her when you're playing through the DLC normally, unless it's possible. I didn't look it up. I should have looked it up. It's possible that she doesn't actually show up until after you finish the Teal Mask storyline. If that's the case, then all of what I'm saying here is moot. But I can't imagine, like, you follow her around both maps, the main game map and the new map. I can't imagine that would be the case unless you're supposed to be able to run into them multiple times throughout the course of your story. You can also see where, even though the level of the rivals teams were scaled up so they'd be more of a challenge for me with my endgame team, you can also see where they would have weaker teams to start with if you were playing this parallel to the main game, with both of them having unevolved Pokemon that should be evolved at like high level 50s and low level 60s. And while that is a bummer because it means I didn't get to play through this parallel to playing through the main game as was intended because this is a DLC, it does mean that anybody who goes back now and plays a new playthrough will get a different experience than they did the first time they played the DLC, which is fun. And also, from what I can tell, the level scaling in this is so much better than the comparable level scaling in, let's say, Isle of Armor, forgot the name of it for a second, was when it came out. Which means that this is a step in the right direction. Now, if they would just step back and give the Pokemon developers time to actually build a complete game from the start, it would be even better, even faster, but any steps forward, I think, are worth celebrating at this point. I also mentioned I really like how the land of Kitakami is designed. There's a ton of personality in basically every corner of this map. More importantly, though, the two rival characters, Carmine and Kieran, they're siblings, and they each have their own personality quirks and foibles, but they're both still good and fun people to hang around with. I like them both, and the writing on them is absolutely superb. Kieran, whose sister is very overbearing, is a very subdued character, but you help bring him out of his shell. Meanwhile, Carmine realizes that she is overbearing to a fault, but because she cares about her brother and wants him to be more outspoken and confident, you can see her start to step back and let him shine through more. It's really good stuff. We don't get enough of it, in fact, as far as I'm concerned. There's even one example here of you being able to make a choice that permanently alters the game world. Like, I don't think it's really intended for this, but there is a thing you can do here. There's a statue that's destroyed as part of the main story of the DLC, and there's a little mini quest, very mini quest, to restore the statue, and if you don't do it, then the statue remains destroyed. It's not a lot, it's just the one thing, really, but it's nice in a Pokemon RPG to see the main character be able to make a choice that permanently affects the layout of this world. And considering my politics, and considering the fact that it was a statue of really terrible people, or Pokemon rather, I think you can probably guess which choice I made. And like, you get stuff for restoring the statue. I just didn't care about the stuff enough to bother doing that. And it's cool. I can return to that site and the statue's just not there. And I don't usually talk about leaks and stuff because I try to stay away from them anyway. I just pick up on some of them through osmosis. But apparently there's been some data mined stuff from information that's already been put in the game for the DLC that suggests that we're going to be able to make more impactful choices in the next DLC. at least until the story rounds out by the end. Our choices will affect the direction of the story up until after the climax. So not necessarily permanent choices, but at least choices that are permanent for the duration of the story that's being told. Kind of like how you could pick one legendary or the other to use to stand up to the final boss of Legends Arceus' main storyline. Obviously, you can still end up with Dialga and Palkia by the end of that game, but for a portion of the game, you are tied to one of the two clans associated with them and to the legendary itself. They stand by you for part of the story. It seems like it can be something similar to that here. And so, again, even though it's a really small thing, it seems like that mentality got its start here in this DLC, and a step forward is still a step forward, and so I end up liking it a lot. Probably more than I should. I'm probably more excited about this than I should be, but I'm still excited about it. More exciting than anything, though, is it seems like Gamefreak has actually listened to us. I talked about, back when I was talking about the base game, that my main issue with it is that it should have side quests. You should be able to go to a town and talk to people and get stuff to do where you go out in the world and you encounter special Pokemon, or you encounter Pokemon under special conditions, and maybe that's what unlocks certain higher evolved Pokemon or certain rarer Pokemon showing up in the wild. Or maybe there are some Pokemon that you can only get by either evolving through complex methods or by completing a side quest. Or you just uncover lore stuff via side quests. And not only does the main story of the Teal Mask feel a lot like what I kind of envisioned one of those side storylines to be, with this being effectively another main storyline that you can or can't do. You get to choose whether or not you do it, and you still get to complete the main game even if you don't do it. But there's a side quest in this DLC that feels like it's a dry run for how they want to handle the side quest option going forward in Pokemon games. You go with a character named Perrin to the Timeless Woods, I think is what it was called, in Kitakami. And this is a place where apparently stuff leaks in through the past from Hisui. And so you're able to encounter a special form of the Pokemon Ursaluna, a Pokemon which, it's a Hisui Pokemon. It's a Legend Arceus Pokemon. That's the first place we saw it. You're able to encounter this new form of Ursaluna, battle and capture it. And not only are boss battles in this just generally better than they are in any base Pokemon game, with each one of them having like its own special theme, being kind of a mini raid. So you get that to a lesser extent than you did in some of the other areas throughout the game. You get that here still, but also the story leading up to it. Not only is Perrin an interesting character who you help deal with stuff, like you help progress her character, but you have to complete a little mini game that's reminiscent of not only the research stuff that you did in Legends Arceus, since you were primarily like a researcher. This storyline not only calls back to that through the fact that you go out to the woods, you set up a tent, you wait for the right moment, and then you go out and you document a bunch of the Pokemon in the area, but you go around with a camera taking pictures of the Pokemon you're documenting, which feels like a callback to Pokemon Snap. It's really fun and atmospheric, and had some great character interactions. Perrin is just a delightful character, and again, another one of those data mine leaks. Apparently she is showing back up in Indigo Disc, and I'm very excited about that. It's just overall, it's extremely enjoyable. And this is what I wanted. This is what I wanted all throughout the main game. I wanted to run into characters like this, maybe not quite so involved as Perrin, maybe not quite so complex and changeable as Perrin, but I wanted to run into characters like this who gave you little quests like this that changed the game in some way temporarily while you were completing them, or allowed you to play the game in a different way, or made you think about playing the game in a different way for a little while. I didn't hate Scarlet and Violet. I actually quite enjoyed it. I don't think it was amazing, but I think it's a good game. But setting aside the graphics, which are still pretty lackluster on everything except the Pokemon models at this point, because I don't care about that, as long as the world looks interesting until you get like super close up to it, right? Putting all that aside, I think this would have been an absolutely excellent game. Like, maybe not 10 out of 10, but pretty freaking close, if it had had stuff like this Blood Moon Ursaluna side quest scattered throughout for you to find. We also need, like, more, like, areas that can only be unlocked through puzzles and stuff. We need that back, too. Like, it's the main reason I really miss Strength, frankly. Work in the side quest stuff, like this Blood Moon Earth Luna thing, and work in more locations that can only be unlocked through puzzles, and I think you've got the formula for an absolutely spectacular modern Pokemon game. And this seems to be them trying that concept out for one of those two things at least. And if that's what they're doing, if that's what they're testing towards, like, it bums me out a little bit that they dropped a whole DLC basically to do that. But I'm also not going to begrudge them that. I've said this multiple times before, but the way Pokemon produces games is just inherently flawed. They rush the development of these games so much that the developers have to pick and choose what they include when, or else they just won't release anything close to their vision. And I don't begrudge them that. It's like a triage situation. They have to do their best to make the least impactful sacrifices, but sacrifices still need to be made. I've also said I do like DLC as a concept. They always feel like, let's use an example that's topical to the channel right now, like the Transformers Prime movie. Like, the story of the series was already wrapped up. We do get some continuations of some of the story and themes in the movie, but for the most part, we didn't need it. It's a bonus story that tells its own self-contained story while just referencing back to the main series. Or let's use a different example that I always end up thinking of, always end up being reminded of when I play through a DLC like Teal Mask. They remind me of, like, the old Digimon AMVs, right? They relate back to and carry forward themes from the animes that they're from, if they're good. Some of them are not. But they tell their own self-contained story that's a little more hype, it's a little more action-packed, a little tighter and more self-contained than the series itself. And I like the idea of getting to play through something like that, a cool bonus episode of my favorite RPG by playing through a DLC like this. I kind of wish they didn't cost money every single time for us to do that, but we live in a capitalist society, so that's just the nature of how things work, unfortunately. So maybe if you're somebody who just inherently dislikes the concept of stuff that arguably should have been in the main game being released in DLC, you're going to have a much lower opinion of this than I am. So take my thoughts with a grain of salt, keeping in mind that I don't mind that kind of thing very much. I think this is a really good DLC. Again, like the main game, it's not spectacular, but it's really solid, and in many ways, a major step up from the main game itself, just on a much smaller scale. And if the stuff that's being carried forward from this into the next DLC, that's being rumored to be carried forward from this into the next DLC, if that's true, if that's really going to be there, and if they're really going to expand on the things that are rumored to be expanded upon, the next DLC is going to be absolutely amazing. It's going to blow this one out of the water. It's going to blow the Sword and Shield DLCs out of the water too. In fact, it seems like, based on some of those rumors and some of the hints left in this DLC, it seems like Indigo Disk is going to be proper post-game content. Like proper Pokemon post-game content with, like, whole additional areas to explore with things to do and storylines to complete, like we used to get back in the day. Possibly even on a scale resembling the post-game in the Johto games. Though not with, like, a whole region to explore, but just, like, in terms of stuff to do after the credits roll. And I know some of my hype for that next DLC is bleeding into how much I enjoyed this one, but this did a good job with its storyline involving Carmine and Kieran, who are definitely going to be in Indigo Disk as characters. It did a good job of hyping me up for that, getting me excited for it. And again, I kind of wish I didn't have to pay for the privilege of having it do that, but I mean, that's clearly what it was intended to do, while also telling an entertaining story and building the world, and giving us fun stuff to do in the meantime, and I think it did all of those things well enough. All of that said, though, I need to reiterate, we gotta push for Gamefreak to develop these games better, to be more patient with their release tables, or else just vastly expand their team somehow so that they could have more groups working on these games parallel to one another. Or, they could, do away with those other projects they've been working on that have been hemorrhaging resources away from Pokemon. But, that's just me being selfish, obviously. They should get to make whatever art they want. I just prefer Pokemon to all that other stuff. Point is, something needs to change, and this is primarily a Japanese product, so stuff that happens here doesn't directly impact that. But we're already seeing artistic groups fighting for and receiving additional protections and rights right now with things like the actors' strike and the writers' strike, and now you've got VFX artists are going to go on strike. They're voting to join unions. They're fighting for unionization. I'm hoping that relatively soon we will see a shift in the whole mentality toward the way that artistic projects like the Pokemon games are developed. That a global precedent is at some point in the near future going to be set, and that we will see better development of Pokemon games going forward. Because I really do believe that the Pokemon world and the Pokemon gameplay style and the gimmicks and the concepts of Pokemon lend to truly, truly fantastic modern games. I really genuinely believe that the only thing holding Pokemon games back from being spectacular is the mentality towards their development. And I think most impactfully, even though I did really like this DLC and I liked Scarlet and Violet, I do foresee a time where even I will reach a point where I'm not okay with Pokemon content just being good enough. I'm going to want it to be great. I'm going to want it to fight, to feel like it did when I played through my first Pokemon game when I was a kid. Because, I know Gold and Silver are not spectacular games in and of themselves, but they felt like they were to me. And I'm going to reach a point where I want Pokemon, as a overarching corporation, to fight to make me feel like that again. With new content that doesn't hold the nostalgia that Gold and Silver do. But I still fully believe that we're going to reach that point. I think we're going to get there. I'm crossing my fingers that I'm right. And one of the reasons I am so hyped up by this DLC is that coupled with those rumors I've been hearing, it really feels like, at least on one side of the whole equation, we are heading in the right direction. We're heading towards that. And I can't help but be cautiously optimistic about that. I'm not going to recommend that you pick this up, obviously, because it's a DLC to another game. If you didn't pick up that game and like it again, you're not going to want this either. But, if you're on the fence about it, if you're considering picking this up anyway, I think you should. I think that's the direction you should lean. But it's really up to you guys. Take what I have said here, try to strip away the clear nostalgia goggling that I have going on, and make your decision based on that. Or just talk to me in the comments about the Easter eggs and the lore stuff and the rumors and all of that that are going to shape how this Scarlet and Violet stuff looks going forward. I'd love to talk about that stuff too. But yeah, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You should also definitely check out the description of this video where I have, the obligatory links, but also a link to the complete first trilogy of my novel series, available right now on Amazon in paperback form or through Kindle, because, as I announced, this will probably go up the day after, so yesterday, the second book in that series is currently free in its Kindle edition, if you guys want to pick it up and give it a try. references back to the first book, but it's a pretty self-contained story in and of itself. So if you want to get a feel for my writing and my series and whether or not you'll like the whole thing overall, it's a pretty good place to start. I would have made the first one free instead, so you could really, start. But Amazon wouldn't let me do that for some reason. But yeah, either way, and in the meantime, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.